Imagine entering a house with no main facade, no symmetry, no attempt to impress the street. It almost feels as if the windows were placed randomly. But the moment you step inside, everything changes. The floors shift in height, the ceiling goes up and down, and the rooms connect to one another, almost like organs inside a human body. In the 20th century, many architects, like Le Corbusier, became fascinated with technology and minimalism. But Adolf Loos asked a different question. How does modern man actually live? Is he supposed to stare out the window all day? Or sit quietly in a room and read a book?
Adolf Loos followed a very different path in architecture. For Loos, ornament was a crime, but only when it wasted human labor, time, or material. If it didn't, he had absolutely no problem using luxurious materials. So let's take a closer look at the architecture of Adolf Loos. If we look at a Renaissance building by Henri Palladio, almost all four facades are similar. Why? Because in classical architecture, the building was conceived as a symmetrical object. No elevation was more important than another. But in Villa Müller, every facade is different. And that is not accidental. Loos no longer designs the building as an object. Instead, he begins by arranging the interior spaces, which means the exterior form becomes the consequence of the interior spaces, not the other way around. Later on, other architects would confront the same question. Can a building have completely different facades? For example, Sainsbury Wing by Robert Venturi. Venturi designs each elevation in response to the city and its surrounding. He responds to context. But Loos is almost indifferent to the street and neighboring buildings. Instead of focusing on the city, he focuses on the interior life of the house. Adolf Loos once said, "I do not design plans or facades, I design spaces." And that is exactly why the exterior can appear almost plain or even unattractive. Because creating an iconic facade was never the goal. Once architecture is designed through a space rather than through floor plan, identical floor no longer makes sense. Inside Villa Müller, almost no two spaces share the same height. As you move from the living room into another space, both the floor level and the ceiling height may suddenly change. Every room has its own special character. This is the idea Loos called Raumplan, a method of designing through interconnected spatial volumes, rather than through flat, repetitive floor plates. From the outside, the house appears to be a simple cubic mass, but in reality, it is composed of multiple interlocking volumes, and traces of those volumes remain visible on the facade. At the same time, Le Corbusier was following a completely different direction. He saw architecture almost as an industrial system. Repetitive floors, regular structure, a kind of architectural assembly line. But Loos had little interest in repetition. For him, every space had to be shaped precisely according to the activity happening inside it. In the early 20th century, new technologies transformed architecture. Reinforced concrete columns and steel frames. Reinforced concrete columns no longer needed to carry structural loads, and suddenly architecture no longer needed rooms. Le Corbusier popularized this idea with the famous domino house. Now a building could consist of nothing more than floors and columns. Walls could move freely. Even the columns no longer needed to be embedded inside walls. This became known as the free plan. But Ludwig Mies van der Rohe pushed the idea even further. He attempted to eliminate the room entirely. Columns were moved to the perimeter so the interior could remain completely open and continuous. This became the open plan. Space flowed like an uninterrupted field, with walls reduced to an absolute minimum. But here's the interesting part. Even though Adolf Loos lived during the exact same period, he never followed that direction. He still begins with rooms, placing one room beside another. But these are no longer classical repetitive rooms. In classical architecture, rooms were usually similar in size and proportion. But in Villa Müller, each room is shaped according to its specific function. Some spaces feel compressed and intimate. Others are tall and theatrical. Interestingly, decades later, Sou Fujimoto revisits a similar idea in House NA. Spaces with varying height, scales, and spatial qualities create intriguing interior perspectives within the house rather than outward views to the exterior. Villa Müller cannot be understood from a single viewport. This architecture depends on movement. You have to walk through it to understand how the spaces transform. This idea is often described as the architectural promenade. Le Corbusier also used this idea. For example, in the Carpenter Center for the Visual Arts, movement unfolds gradually and horizontally through ramp. But in Villa Müller, movement is primarily vertical through stairs. You constantly move upward and downward, and each shift in level creates a completely different spatial experience. Years later, Rem Koolhaas continued this idea in the Embassy of the Netherlands building, but this time the corridor itself becomes a spectacle. The path of movement is pulled outward and exposed. It seems that an idea Adolf Loos once quietly and secretly began has ultimately evolved into a public and more expressive performance in the facades of the contemporary buildings. Adolf Loos wrote a phrase that became legendary in architectural history: "Ornament is crime." But did he really mean architecture should be simple and minimalist? Not exactly. Loos actually loved the textures and patterns of natural stone. After all, he grew up in his father's stonemasonry workshop. And this is exactly where many people misunderstand Loos. Because if you look carefully, Villa Müller is filled with luxurious materials and expensive stone surfaces. So Loos had no problem with materials that were richly patterned and colorful. What he opposed was wasted human energy. Loos believed modern people should devote their energy to thought, not to unnecessary decoration. In his view, when a craftsman spends countless hours carving ornamental details, human labor is being wasted. He famously argued that instead of producing one heavily ornamented chair, you could manufacture 7 simple ones. So the goal was never simplicity for its own sake. The goal was efficiency, and this is precisely where Loos diverges from Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier transforms architecture into a manifesto about modernity. Villa Savoye is almost a declaration, a building designed to be seen, even through an extreme form of minimalism. But Villa Müller is almost silent. It is designed for living, not for making statements. Loos even believed that windows were not meant for looking outside. Windows existed primarily for light. He once told Le Corbusier, "A gentleman never looks out the window." Because for Loos, the most important events in life happen inside the home. In his view, beauty was never supposed to perform for the street. It was supposed to enter the space of everyday life itself. For Loos, ornament was never eliminated. It was simply relocated from the exterior of building to the interior, to the place where human life actually happens, not the place where architecture merely performs for attention. And that is why Villa Müller appears so calm, restrained, and almost silent from the outside, while inside it becomes a world of diverse textures, materials, and rich spatial experiences.